Have you ever had the feeling that you see things differently from the people around you, especially within your own family? Perhaps there were moments when you noticed certain behaviors or ways of thinking that seemed to repeat over and over again. Maybe the same arguments happened year after year, the same misunderstandings appeared in different relationships, or the same beliefs about life were passed down without ever being questioned. At some point, you may have quietly wondered why these patterns continued and whether things really had to stay that way. For many people, this realization begins slowly. It might start with a simple observation during a family conversation, a moment when you notice how certain reactions seem predictable. Someone says something that triggers the same type of argument that has happened many times before. A belief about success, relationships, or personal worth is repeated as if it were a permanent truth. These moments can feel strangely familiar, almost as if the same story has been playing out for generations. When someone begins noticing these patterns, they often experience a sense of difference from the environment they grew up in. While others may accept these behaviors as normal, the person observing them may start asking deeper questions. Why do these conflicts keep repeating? Why do certain beliefs continue to shape decisions, even when they lead to the same results? Why does the same emotional dynamic appear in different relationships over time? At first, these questions may remain unspoken. The person asking them may simply observe and reflect quietly. They might notice patterns in how people communicate with one another, how emotions are expressed or suppressed, or how certain assumptions about life guide decisions without being examined. What others view as normal routines may begin to appear as repeating cycles. These cycles can take many forms. In some families, communication may revolve around criticism rather than understanding. In others, emotions may be avoided or ignored instead of discussed openly. Some families carry beliefs about money, success, or self-worth that limit the opportunities individuals believe they deserve. Over time, these patterns can become so familiar that they feel permanent, even when they create challenges. However, when someone begins to notice these repeating dynamics, something important has already started to change. Awareness is the first step in transforming any pattern. The moment a person recognizes that a behavior or belief has been repeating for years, they begin seeing the possibility that the cycle could eventually be different. Sometimes this awareness can feel confusing. The person who notices the pattern may wonder why others do not see it the same way. They may feel as though they are looking at the same situation from a completely different perspective. Yet this difference does not mean they are disconnected from their family or background. In many cases, it simply means they are the first person to observe the pattern clearly. This moment of recognition is significant. Throughout history, many cycles have continued across generations simply because no one stopped to question them. When one person begins to look at those patterns with awareness, they introduce the possibility of change. By seeing the pattern, they also gain the ability to make different choices. This is where the central idea of this video begins to take shape. The person who feels different may not be separate from their family's story. Instead, they may be playing an important role within it. By recognizing patterns that have gone unnoticed for years, they become the individual capable of shifting the direction of that story. Breaking a generational cycle does not always happen through dramatic actions. Often it begins with small but meaningful decisions. Choosing to communicate more openly, choosing to question limiting beliefs, or choosing to approach relationships with greater awareness can slowly change the patterns that once seemed fixed. When someone becomes aware of cycles that have existed across generations and decides to approach them differently, they can become the person who transforms the direction of an entire family narrative. Their awareness creates the opportunity for something new to emerge where repetition once existed. If this message reflects something you have experienced in your own life, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who may also be going through a similar journey, and subscribe to the channel for more content about awareness and personal growth. The first step in changing any long-standing pattern begins with something simple but powerful: recognition. Before a cycle can be transformed, someone has to notice that the cycle exists in the first place. Many of the patterns that shape families and communities continue for years, not because people consciously choose them, but because they have become so familiar that no one stops to question them. In many environments, Behaviors and beliefs are passed down quietly from one generation to the next. Children grow up observing how adults respond to conflict, how they talk about money, how they handle emotions, and how they define success or failure. These examples slowly become internalized as the normal way life works. By the time the next generation grows older, these patterns often continue automatically, simply because they are the only models that were ever seen. For instance, in some families, emotional communication may be limited or avoided. Difficult feelings might be hidden instead of discussed. Over time, this habit becomes part of the family dynamic. People learn to suppress emotions rather than express them openly. Without realizing it, this pattern can continue through multiple generations because it was never recognized as something that could be different. Other patterns may revolve around conflict. In some households, disagreements escalate quickly into arguments because that is how people learn to respond to tension. When this behavior repeats long enough, it begins to feel like an unavoidable part of family life. Yet often the individuals involved do not realize they are repeating a learned response that was modeled years before. Beliefs about success and money can also become generational patterns. Some families pass down the idea that financial security is difficult to achieve, or that certain opportunities are beyond reach. These beliefs can influence the way people approach education, careers, and risk. Even when circumstances change, the belief itself may remain, quietly shaping decisions without being consciously examined. Similar patterns can appear in attitudes about personal worth. In some environments, individuals may grow up hearing messages that emphasize limitation rather than possibility. Statements such as, "People like us don't succeed in that field," or "You should not expect too much from life," can become deeply embedded beliefs. Over time, these ideas can affect how individuals view their own abilities and potential. The important point is that most of these patterns are not created intentionally. They emerge gradually through repeated experiences and shared assumptions. When people grow up surrounded by the same behaviors and beliefs, it becomes easy to accept them as permanent realities, rather than patterns that can be changed. However, something significant happens when one person begins observing these patterns with curiosity. Instead of accepting them automatically, they start asking questions. Why do we react this way during conflict? Why are certain emotions rarely discussed openly? Why are certain beliefs about money or success repeated so often? These questions do not necessarily arise from criticism or rejection of family traditions. Instead, they often come from a desire to understand. The person asking them may simply want to know why certain dynamics exist and whether alternative approaches might be possible. This moment of awareness represents the beginning of change. When someone recognizes that a pattern exists, they separate themselves from the automatic continuation of that pattern. Instead of repeating behavior without reflection, they begin observing it from a new perspective. Observation is a powerful tool because it creates space between awareness and reaction. When someone sees a familiar pattern unfolding, they have the opportunity to pause and consider a different response. For example, if a conversation begins to follow the same path toward conflict, awareness allows the individual to recognize the pattern before it fully develops. Similarly, when a limiting belief appears, awareness allows a person to examine it rather than accept it automatically. They may begin asking whether the belief is based on present reality or whether it originated from past experiences that no longer apply. This process does not happen instantly. Recognizing patterns often takes time because many of them are deeply rooted in habit and tradition. At first, a person may only notice small examples. A comment during a conversation might reveal an underlying assumption about success or relationships. A reaction to stress might highlight a familiar emotional pattern. As these observations accumulate, the larger picture begins to emerge. The person starts seeing connections between different experiences. Behaviors that once appeared isolated begin to reveal themselves as part of a broader cycle that has been repeating over time. At this stage, awareness becomes both enlightening and challenging. On one hand, the person gains clarity about the dynamics that shaped their environment. On the other hand, they may realize how long these patterns have existed and how deeply they influence daily interactions. Yet this awareness is also empowering. Once a pattern is visible, it becomes possible to question it. The individual no longer feels obligated to repeat the same behaviors simply because they have always existed. Instead, they gain the freedom to consider new ways of responding. For example, someone who recognizes a pattern of avoiding emotional conversations may choose to communicate more openly. A person who notices repeated conflict patterns may begin approaching disagreements with patience and curiosity, rather than immediate reaction. Someone who identifies limiting beliefs about success may begin exploring opportunities that previous generations believed were impossible. These choices may seem small at first, but they represent important shifts. Each time a person chooses a response that differs from the established pattern, they interrupt the cycle. Over time, these interruptions can gradually reshape the environment around them. Another important aspect of recognizing patterns is understanding that awareness does not require blame. Generational cycles often develop because people respond to the circumstances of their time. The behaviors and beliefs that were passed down may have originally served as ways to cope with challenges or protect family stability. Recognizing a pattern does not mean judging those who carried it forward. Instead, it means acknowledging that circumstances have changed and that new approaches may be possible. This perspective allows individuals to move forward with compassion rather than resentment. When awareness is combined with understanding, the process of change becomes more constructive. The goal is not to reject the past, but to learn from it. By examining how certain patterns developed, individuals can choose which aspects of their heritage they wish to continue and which ones they wish to transform. Over time, this awareness can influence the entire environment. When one person begins responding differently to familiar situations, others may gradually notice the change. New conversations may emerge. New expectations may develop. Even small shifts in behavior can introduce the possibility that long-standing cycles do not have to continue indefinitely. This is why recognition is such an important step. Without awareness, patterns remain invisible and continue automatically. With awareness, they become visible, and once something is visible, it can be changed. The message of this stage is simple but essential. A pattern cannot be changed until it is first recognized. Recognizing a repeating pattern is an important beginning, but awareness alone does not automatically change anything. The moment someone decides to respond differently from the way previous generations have responded, the real challenge often begins. Breaking a long-standing cycle requires more than simply understanding it. It requires the willingness to act differently, and acting differently within a familiar environment can be far more difficult than it first appears. Families and communities develop patterns because those patterns become comfortable and predictable over time. Even if the behaviors are not healthy, they still provide a sense of familiarity. People know what to expect from one another. Conversations follow recognizable rhythms, emotional reactions occur in predictable ways, and beliefs about life remain stable because they have been repeated for years. When one person begins approaching those patterns differently, the change can disrupt that sense of familiarity. This disruption does not always occur through direct conflict. Often, it appears as subtle resistance. When someone starts questioning beliefs that have been accepted for generations, others may react with confusion. They might wonder why something that has always been done a certain way suddenly needs to be reconsidered. Even when the person's intention is positive, the change may feel uncomfortable to those who are used to the existing pattern. For example, imagine someone who grew up in an environment where emotions were rarely discussed openly. If that person begins encouraging honest conversations about feelings, other family members may not immediately respond with enthusiasm. They may feel uncertain about how to participate in that kind of conversation because it is unfamiliar territory. In some cases, they may even dismiss the idea, not because it is wrong, but because it challenges habits they have relied on for years. A similar reaction can occur with beliefs about success, relationships, or personal identity. If someone begins pursuing goals that were previously considered unrealistic within their environment, the people around them may question those choices. They might express concern, skepticism, or even criticism. Again, these reactions are not always meant to discourage. Often they simply reflect the discomfort people feel when familiar assumptions are challenged. This is one of the reasons breaking generational cycles can feel lonely at times. The person who recognizes the pattern may see possibilities that others have not yet considered. While they may feel excited about exploring new approaches, those around them may still be attached to the older way of thinking. This difference in perspective can create a sense of distance, even within close relationships. Many individuals who begin changing long-standing patterns describe experiencing periods of misunderstanding. They may feel as though they are speaking a different language from the people around them. Conversations that once felt simple may become more complex because the underlying assumptions are no longer shared. At times, this can lead to frustration or doubt. During these moments, it is easy to question whether choosing a different path is worth the difficulty. Human beings naturally seek belonging, and when a person's choices begin separating them from familiar patterns, the emotional weight of that separation can be significant. It can feel easier to return to the old cycle simply because doing so restores a sense of acceptance. However, personal growth often requires moving through this uncomfortable stage. When someone begins transforming generational patterns, they are not only changing their own behavior, they are also redefining expectations that have existed for years. Adjusting those expectations takes time, both for the individual making the change and for the people around them. Patience becomes essential during this process. Generational patterns did not appear overnight, and they rarely disappear quickly. The individual breaking the cycle may need to remind themselves that progress happens gradually. Each new decision, each new response, and each new conversation contributes to the slow transformation of the environment. Courage also plays an important role. Choosing a different path requires the willingness to stand by new values, even when they are not immediately understood. Courage does not mean confronting others with hostility or attempting to force change. Instead, it often involves quietly continuing to live according to principles that feel healthier and more authentic. For example, someone who recognizes unhealthy communication patterns may begin practicing calm and respectful dialogue even during tense moments. At first, this approach may feel unusual within the existing environment. Others may continue reacting according to the familiar pattern, yet over time, consistent behavior can gradually influence the tone of interactions. The presence of a different example introduces the possibility that conversations can unfold in new ways. Persistence is another key element in breaking generational cycles. Because the patterns have existed for so long, there will likely be moments when the old habits attempt to reappear. Stressful situations can trigger familiar reactions, and it may take repeated effort to respond differently. This does not mean the process is failing. It simply reflects how deeply those patterns were established. The important thing is that each attempt to respond differently strengthens the new direction. Even small changes accumulate over time. A single moment of awareness during a difficult conversation can prevent a familiar conflict from repeating. A single decision to question a limiting belief can open the door to opportunities that once seemed impossible. Another aspect of this journey is learning to balance compassion with determination. The person breaking the cycle may come to realize that previous generations were shaped by circumstances that influenced their beliefs and behaviors. Understanding this context can create empathy for why certain patterns developed in the first place. At the same time, empathy does not require continuing those patterns indefinitely. By approaching the process with compassion, individuals can avoid turning their efforts into a conflict with the past. Instead of rejecting their background, they acknowledge it, while choosing to build something healthier moving forward. This balanced perspective allows them to honor their family history while still creating change. Over time, the feeling of isolation that sometimes accompanies this path often begins to soften. As individuals grow more confident in their choices, they may attract new relationships or communities that share similar values. These connections provide encouragement and reinforce the belief that change is possible. Even within the original environment, gradual shifts may begin to appear. When one person consistently demonstrates a different approach to communication, emotional awareness, or decision-making, others may slowly become curious about that example. Change that once seemed threatening can eventually begin to feel natural. This transformation rarely happens instantly. It unfolds through repeated moments of courage, patience, and persistence. Each decision to respond differently becomes part of a larger process that reshapes long-standing habits and expectations. The central message of this stage is that breaking generational cycles is rarely easy. It often requires stepping into unfamiliar territory and continuing forward, even when understanding is not immediate. Yet the difficulty itself is often a sign that something meaningful is taking place. Choosing a new path may feel uncomfortable at first, but that discomfort is often the beginning of lasting change. Changing generational patterns requires courage to question what has always been accepted, patience to allow new habits to develop, and persistence to continue moving forward even when the path feels uncertain. When a person begins breaking a long-standing pattern, the impact of that decision rarely remains limited to their own life. At first, the change may appear personal. It might look like a shift in the way someone communicates, the way they respond to conflict, or the way they think about themselves and their possibilities. Yet over time, these changes often ripple outward, influencing the environment around them in ways that may not be immediately obvious. Human behavior is deeply shaped by observation. People learn not only from direct instruction, but from the examples they see every day. Children watch how adults handle stress, how they talk to one another, how they react to disappointment, and how they pursue opportunities. These observations quietly shape their understanding of what is normal and what is possible. When one person begins responding differently to familiar situations, they introduce a new example into that environment. Consider how communication patterns influence relationships. In many families, conversations during difficult moments may historically have been dominated by anger, avoidance, or silence. If someone who recognizes this pattern begins responding with calm discussion, listening, and patience, they demonstrate a different approach to handling emotion. At first, the difference may feel unusual to others. However, repeated exposure to that new behavior gradually introduces the idea that conflict can be handled in a healthier way. Over time, these examples can change expectations. People who witness respectful communication may begin to adopt similar approaches themselves. They may realize that conversations do not have to escalate into arguments or dissolve into silence. The presence of one consistent example can slowly reshape the tone of interactions within the family or community. Emotional awareness can have a similar effect. In environments where feelings were historically dismissed or ignored, someone who begins acknowledging emotions openly creates space for others to do the same. By expressing their thoughts honestly and encouraging understanding rather than judgment, they model a form of emotional maturity that others may gradually learn from. This influence is particularly important for younger generations. Children often absorb patterns without consciously realizing it. They learn how relationships work by observing the adults around them. If those adults demonstrate patience, empathy, and healthy boundaries, those qualities become part of the child's understanding of how to interact with others. When someone breaks a generational cycle, they create a different model for the next generation to observe. Instead of inheriting the same patterns that existed before, younger family members gain access to new possibilities. They see that communication can be open rather than hostile. They see that challenges can be approached with resilience rather than avoidance. They see that personal growth is possible, even when the past contained limitations. The impact of these changes often becomes visible years later. A child who grows up in an environment where emotions are respected may develop stronger emotional intelligence as an adult. Someone who observes healthy boundaries in relationships may approach their own relationships with greater clarity and balance. These outcomes may seem natural to them, yet they often trace back to the moment when someone earlier chose to change the pattern. Generational change does not always require dramatic actions. In many cases, it begins with consistent small decisions. Choosing to listen instead of reacting impulsively, choosing to question limiting beliefs instead of accepting them, or choosing to support others rather than criticize them, can gradually reshape the atmosphere within a family or community. Another important aspect of this process is the introduction of new beliefs about possibility. Many generational cycles involve assumptions about what individuals are capable of achieving. If past generations believed that certain opportunities were unattainable, those beliefs may have limited the ambitions of those who came afterward. When one person begins challenging those assumptions, they expand the boundaries of what others believe is possible. By pursuing education, creative projects, personal development, or new forms of work, they demonstrate that the limitations of the past do not necessarily define the future. Their actions send a powerful message that growth and change are always possible. This shift in perspective can inspire others to reconsider their own beliefs. relatives, friends, or community members may begin exploring possibilities they had previously dismissed. In this way, the decision of one person to step outside an old pattern can open doors for many others. Breaking a generational cycle also has a profound effect on how individuals approach challenges. In environments where hardship was historically met with resignation or avoidance, someone who responds with determination and problem-solving introduces a different model of resilience. Their approach shows that difficulties can be faced with creativity and perseverance rather than fear. Over time, this example encourages others to view challenges differently. Instead of assuming that obstacles must be accepted as permanent, they begin considering how those obstacles might be overcome. This change in mindset can transform the way families and communities approach adversity. It is important to recognize that the influence of breaking a cycle often unfolds gradually. The person initiating the change may not immediately see the full impact of their choices. Sometimes the most meaningful effects appear years later, when new generations grow up with different expectations and possibilities. However, even when the impact is not immediately visible, the significance of the change remains real. Each decision to respond differently from the past contributes to the creation of a new pattern. Over time, these new patterns become part of the environment that shapes future experiences. In this sense, breaking a generational cycle is not simply an act of personal transformation. It is also an act of leadership. By choosing awareness and growth, the individual introduces a new direction for the story that future generations will inherit. The power of this process lies in its ability to reshape the narrative of an entire family or community. Instead of continuing a pattern defined by limitation or misunderstanding, the new narrative emphasizes growth, understanding, and possibility. Each generation that follows has the opportunity to build upon this new foundation. What once seemed like an unchangeable cycle gradually becomes a history lesson rather than a living pattern. Future generations may still learn about the challenges their ancestors faced, but they are no longer bound to repeat those experiences in the same way. This transformation highlights an important truth about personal growth. The decisions individuals make today influence not only their present circumstances, but also the environment that future generations will experience. Every new pattern that replaces an old one becomes part of the legacy that is passed forward. The message of this stage is clear. Breaking a cycle does not only change the present moment, it creates new possibilities for the future. When someone chooses awareness, healthier communication, and a more conscious approach to life, they help shape a path that others can follow. In this way, the act of breaking a generational cycle becomes far more than a personal achievement. It becomes the beginning of a new direction for the future. As we come to the end of this discussion, it is helpful to step back and reflect on the deeper ideas that have been explored throughout this video. When people begin examining their experiences with greater awareness, they often realize that the patterns shaping their lives did not appear randomly. Many of them were inherited through environments, beliefs, and habits that developed over many years and sometimes across several generations. The first important idea we explored is that meaningful change begins with recognition. Before anything can be transformed, someone has to notice that a pattern exists. Many cycles continue simply because they are never questioned. When a person becomes aware of repeated behaviors, emotional responses, or beliefs that appear again and again within their family or environment, they reach the first stage of change. Awareness creates the possibility of seeing life from a new perspective and realizing that the way things have always been does not necessarily have to define the future. The second idea we discussed is that choosing a different path is rarely easy. When someone begins thinking and acting differently from the environment they grew up in, it can create moments of tension or misunderstanding. People who are used to familiar patterns may feel uncertain about changes that challenge those habits. For the person initiating the change, this can sometimes lead to feelings of being different, isolated, or misunderstood. Yet this experience is often part of the natural process of growth. Moving beyond long-standing patterns requires courage, patience, and a willingness to continue forward even when the path feels unfamiliar. The third idea highlights the broader impact of breaking generational cycles. When a person changes the way they respond to situations, communicate with others, or think about themselves and their possibilities, the influence of that change rarely stops with them. Their actions introduce new examples into the environment around them. These examples can gradually reshape how others approach relationships, challenges, and personal development. Over time, the choices of one individual can influence how future generations understand themselves and the world around them. When these three ideas come together, they reveal a powerful perspective about personal transformation. Every generation carries stories, habits, and beliefs shaped by the experiences of the past. These traditions and patterns form the foundation of family and cultural identity. Yet history also shows that sometimes a single individual becomes aware of patterns that others have accepted without question. That awareness creates an opportunity to reshape the direction of the story. This process does not require rejecting the past or viewing previous generations with judgment. In many cases, the beliefs and behaviors that were passed down developed as ways of coping with the challenges of earlier times. Understanding this context allows individuals to approach change with compassion and respect for the experiences that came before them. Breaking a generational cycle is not about denying where someone comes from. Instead, it is about building upon that history in a healthier and more conscious way. By recognizing patterns, questioning limiting beliefs, and choosing responses that encourage growth, individuals create space for a more positive future to emerge. When someone takes this step, they become part of a process that extends far beyond a single moment in time. Their awareness introduces new possibilities for the people around them and for the generations that follow. What once seemed like an unchangeable pattern becomes an opportunity for transformation. If this video made you reflect on your role within your family or your life journey, take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who may also be trying to create positive change, and subscribe to the channel for more content about awareness, personal growth, and the path of self-transformation.